This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Hey.
Recording in progress. Hey, welcome to Dream Idiots. My name is Morris, and the other fella is Bryan.
Hey. What's new? What's shaking?
Not a lot. Survived Halloween and some other stuff that was going on. Hope everybody out there is doing well. Thanks for sticking with us, and thanks for keeping in touch with us via email and passenger pigeon and other forms of communication, such as checking out our website, checking out our. Are we on Instagram, Bryan? I can't remember. Are we on Instagram? We're not. We are. Okay, good.
Keep up, old man. Yes. Oh, yeah, it's on Facebook. Yes, Facebook and Instagram, we're Dream Idiots. And the email address is dreamidiots.podcast@gmail.com. And check us out, dreamidiots.com for everything. And we're on pretty much every single platform these days. So please like and share and subscribe. We'd love to get some more. Haven't had any new reviews recently. So if you don't mind going on there, shoot us 5 stars. And give us a review telling the world how Dream Idiots has given your life meaning. That would be super helpful and helps us climb the charts.
Dear sirs, I see why you're idiots, but there's nothing dreamy about you or your podcasts. Each week, Bryan and I tell each other and you stories, half-remembered personal memories, or perhaps stuff we've made up, or stuff we find interesting from the news or from the past. And it is episode 90, which means it's an even-numbered episode, if I remember numbers correctly. And it means I get to go first. Is that correct, up, Bryan?
Go.
Okay, Bryan, I want to tell you about a guy by the name of Francois Schirm.
Francois Schirm. No idea.
How's that for a name?
It's a fabulous name.
Yeah, it is. He was born in Hungary in 1932. He witnessed and survived horrific bombings during World War II. Schirm and his mother traveled across Europe, avoiding death at the hands of both the Germans and the Russians as he bounced around through various countries, dodging war-type stuff, including these horrific bombings I mentioned. At one point, he's returning home from school to discover the bomb shelter where his mother had been taken for the day to fend off and try to survive bombings had been totally demolished, killing everyone except 4 people. One of the 4 survivors was indeed his mother. So they saw a lot of horrible shit in World War II. Once the war was over, he enlisted with the French Foreign Legion at the age of 18. And you know all about the French Foreign Legion. We've seen stories about that and how you can get, if you serve for 5 years, you can get a French passport when you're done, right? You can get French citizenship. So once that contract was over, he emigrated to Quebec in 1957. He arrived just in time there in Quebec to witness the final term of provincial Prime Minister Maurice Duplessis, who had led the Union Nationale political party since its founding in 1936. They were kind of out of power during the war, but for the most part, they were in power from 1936 until 1960. Duplessis died in 1959. The Union Nationale was, I think you would have liked them, Bryan. They were a conservative, nationalist, populist, anti-communist, anti-union party. And under Duplessis' leadership, they were aligned with the Catholic Church extremely, very heavily. The Catholic Church in the province at the time was a powerful institution in mid-century Quebec, controlling lots of educational and health services. The driving force for this party was the belief in Quebec autonomy. Now, this is not Quebec separatism. It is more autonomy within the province to do things like have the Catholic Church be in charge of stuff while remaining part of the Canadian Federation. The social, government, and business power structures of the time were based in Anglo-Canadianism, and French Canadians, for example, ranked 12th out of the 14 recognized ethnic groups in regards to education and income. Okay. So the French Canadians were looked down upon pretty heavily there And in terms of jobs opportunity, income opportunity, they were 12 out of 14. I mean, that's pretty far down there. After many Quebec citizens of both Anglophone and Francophone have referred to Duplessis' leadership as, quote, the Great Darkness. After his death in 1959, a, quote, quiet revolution swept the Union Nationale out of office, and a progressive leadership emerged in 1960, a more progressive leadership than that. Now, let me speak for a moment. You've heard about the government institution. Let me speak for a moment about businesses at the time. And the best example of this is a gentleman by the name of Donald Gordon. He had such an impact at the time that there's actually something called the Donald Gordon Affair named after him, which sounds like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode.
Mm-hmm.
The business of Donald Gordon, however, did his best to just shit on all over that hopefulness and recast the shadow of the Great Darkness in December of 1962. He was president of the Canadian National Railway, and at the time that was a federally owned company. At the annual end-of-year meeting, a Quebec MP noted for the record that amongst all of the vice presidents and directors of the Canadian National Railway, there was not one single French Canadian among them. And he was quoted as saying, Gordon was, as far as I'm concerned, as long as I am president, promotions are not going to be made because the person is French Canadian. Okay, so there's a number of ways you could take that. You could take it that this is based in meritocracy. You're
Right.
not going to give someone a promotion just because they happen to be a certain nationality. Well, that's not how that was taken in Quebec, as you might imagine. Did not go over well. For many, it was just one example of the off-the-cuff arrogance of Anglo-Canada. It stirred the simmering rage left over from the Great Darkness era, and that spurred on the separatist movement of Canada. So, in addition to Schirm arriving at the time of the Great Darkness ending, he also came in to Quebec just in time to witness the birth of the FLQ in the early 1960s. And here's where in the story I start to mangle French words. I apologize.
Yeah, French is impossible. So yeah,
I think back on all the stories you've done about language on our podcast, Bryan, and you've apologized in advance. And sometimes you flat out refuse to say them in French. I'm going to make up for all of that in one fell swoop in the story. The FLQ in French stood for
Trudeau. I can do Trudeau. That's it.
Beignet. The FLQ stands for Front de Libération du Québec, or the Quebec Liberation Front, as we would say in English. The FLQ emerged from the ranks of the Rassemblement pour l'Indépendance des Nationales, or the Assembly of National Independence for Quebec, the RIN. So the FLQ and the RIN. The RIN was actually the first Quebec separatist organization. Definitionally, they wanted independence from the Federation of Canada, and that was their goal of both of these groups, the creation of a sovereign nation of Quebec, separate and apart from Canada. The FLQ was comprised of loosely organized groups of cells of these Quebec separatists, and they felt that the RIN had moved too slowly. In other words, they were playing too nicely with the Canadian government. George Schoutler, who was a Belgian-born Quebec citizen, emerged as an early leader of one of these cells. These FLQ members felt that the democratic vision of a free Quebec could not be achieved via traditional means. The quiet revolution, in other words, was far too quiet. Schoutler envisioned a group of freedom fighters, organized not unlike Fidel Castro's Cuban guerrillas. He was actually fascinated with Castro. Okay, so Schoutler emerged.
That's never good.
He emerged as a leader of this early FLQ movement. And in this era of the FLQ, the organization, and this is kind of where the modern construction of the FLQ gets to be known. This is where you might be familiar with this part of the FLQ. The organization inflicted a series of bombings on the city of Montreal in the early 60s. Such targets as armories, railway lines, mailboxes. They're known really big mailbox bombers. The National Revenue Building, McGill and Loyola universities, among others. This bombing campaign lasted from March 7th to May 20th of 1963. So, it was a good 3-month campaign of terror. One person was killed and another gentleman was severely maimed. This is more worthy of an episode unto itself, but I just kind of wanted to give the historical perspective of what Schirm was coming into when he came into the FLQ himself. A second smaller wave that consisted of just 6 people operated as the Quebec Liberation Army, and they're considered to be the second wave of FLQ folks, and they basically robbed places.
Huh.
And they netted about $100,000 Canadian back then, which comes out to about 900,000, I think, in today's dollars. And a couple of these folks were actually family members of people from the first wave. So they were operating under the FLQ banner as well. Now, along comes Francois Schirm into all of this. So he's seen what's been going on. He's seen the Great Darkness. He's been in Montreal for a while. Like Schouter, he is an immigrant. Right? He speaks French, but he's not a natural-born Quebecois. Schirm's group is often identified as the third wave of FLQ activity. Schirm himself was seen by the members of the RIN. Remember, they're the first group of the group that was moving too slowly. He was seen by members of the RIN as a bit odd and described often as, quote, a stranger who spoke a French that, quote, wasn't quite right. Kind of like me. Like Schouter before him, he felt other separatist groups were moving far too slowly, and that included the RIN and earlier waves of the FLQ, including Schouter's group. Schirm figured he could organize an army of revolutionaries that could easily topple local government. He saw the earlier FLQ waves as, quote, a bunch of amateurs. He began to recruit young Quebecois men to his cause, and in July of 1964, a dozen or so fresh recruits, along with Francois Schirm, set up a training camp in the woods of Saint Boniface, a municipality located in the Mauricie region of Quebec, north of Montreal. Schirm christened this force the l'Armée de Révolutionnaire du Québec, the ARQ. So here's another little bit of letters
more acronyms
for alphabet soup. The army, basically the Quebec Revolutionary Army, or the ARQ, as I'll call it from here on out. By Schirm's estimates, his army could double in size by autumn, and by January exceed 500 members, maybe even 600. The following spring would see a force of 2,500 soldiers out in the woods. This new army, in Schirm's vision, would gain the support of, like good revolutionaries, would gain the support of local farmers, unions, and college students. Okay, typically leftist organizations.
Absolutely right.
This movement would gain the attention of no less than Che Guevara, who would correspond via telegram and eventually visit the camp and inspire the troops of the ARQ. Have you heard about this happening in the woods of Quebec?
Aspects of this are ringing a bell, but yeah, I don't have the details.
None of that actually happened.
Oh, really? Okay.
None of that came to fruition. Che never set foot in camp or communicated with the ARQ in any way. The locals wanted nothing to do with the ARQ.
It was just propaganda.
Well, it was all his vision. He
Right.
said this was going to happen, but it never came to pass.
Okay.
And the recruitment drive may have not gotten 500 or 600 new soldiers, but it did snag 2. two
Nearly,
not,
almost. Rounding
not
up.
two,
Right.
not 200, two new guys. So now there's 14 of these guys running around the woods north of Montreal. The armory, however, was another issue. It consisted of 3 pistols, 4 rifles, 5 knives, 4 sticks of dynamite, and 2, quote, large metal poles. Schirm catch supplies.
This should be enough. No, we'll be fine. We need armed to the teeth.
Sir, you are a bit odd, and you're speaking French. That is a bit strange. Schirm cached supplies from an unknown supplier. He found somehow he could get basic potatoes, beans, rice, staples, pastas. And he could often be heard talking on the telephone, discussing food and weapon rationing. Some soldiers assumed he was talking with other FLQ cells or maybe sympathizers, trying to get more supplies for his group. But he had a plan that would at least take care of the weapons problem. because an army needs weapons, even if it's just an army of 14.
Army 14,
right?
right.
You've got to have weapons.
Hmm.
He decided to rob a gun store.
Like all good armies. Yeah, sure.
Not just any gun store, but the heavily stocked International Firearms Company, located in downtown Montreal. The plan was pretty simple. Now, go with me here on Schirm's vision, his plan of how this is going to work.
Uh-huh.
Schirm and 4 others would drive into the city and park behind the gun store. 3 soldiers would remain in the car with the trunk open, one as a getaway driver, the other 2 as loaders of the stolen goods. Schirm and Edmund Gwinnett would enter the store posing as customers. Edmund would linger near the front door while Schirm would ask a clerk for help with a rifle. All of the weapons in the gun store are unloaded, of course, to prevent what the ARQ was about to attempt. Once in possession of the rifle, Schirm would pull out a loaded clip from his jacket pocket that matched that rifle, slam it home, and presto, he's got a loaded weapon ready to go. So far,
right? So yeah. Uh-huh.
He and Edmund would hold the dozen or so customers and employees at bay, should there be that many people there, while 2 others cleared the store of weapons and ammo, shoveling them into the trunk of the car, where the getaway driver was ready and waiting. They'd speed off back to St. Boniface, now well armed.
Uh-huh.
Bryan, this is not what happened. Schirm, Edmund, and 2 other soldiers of the ARQ traveled down from St. Boniface on the morning of August 29th, 1964, in a stolen Pontiac. The getaway driver had bailed on the plan the night before. This was a smart move on his part. The group managed to enlist a new driver during a visit to the Cochon Bar, which is a great name. It's a cabaret frequented by FLQ members and sympathizers. Cochon Borgne, you know what that means?
No, no idea.
It means one-eyed pig.
Uh-uh.
The new recruit was convinced not by revolutionary rhetoric, but by the fact that the theft would be a poke in the eye for the provincial Anglophone government in the days preceding Queen Elizabeth's visit. She was coming to visit Canada soon. And they figured, hey, this is going to be a good way to stick it to...
snag some headlines, right?
That's right, the Anglophones and the Anglophiles. They then downed a few beers to help them relax, with Schirm giving the final reminder that no one should fire for, quote, no good reason. Finally, at 5:55 p.m., the team arrived at the International Firearms Company just before closing time. Francois and Edmund entered the store, and the plan began. It went as far as Francois jamming the clip into the M1 rifle before everything went horribly, horribly wrong. While customers and employees were ordered against one wall, store manager Leslie McWilliams approached Edmund. Remember, he's posted up by the front door. Edmund, who was waving his gun around. McWilliams apparently thought he was just a customer acting irresponsibly, but he was actually panicking. Edmund then shot McWilliams in the abdomen. Amidst this chaos inside the store, the weapons loading started in the car outside. 2 city policemen walking their beat caught sight of the car at the rear of the building, and 2 men with arms full of rifles exiting the store. Ordering them into the ground, a hail of bullets then came from the back doorway. Charging out from the front door, Schirm and Edmund made their way around the corner just before policemen arrived at the store entrance. Edmund caught a cab and left the neighborhood, while Schirm limped up the street, having taken a bullet in the thigh. Store employee Alfred Pinish chased them, clutching a rifle. He managed to get out the words, "I work here, don't shh," before the Montreal police shot and killed him right there in the street. All 5 members of the ARQ squad that day were arrested and sentenced to various terms in jail or worse. Schirm, being a complete asshole, served as his own counsel at his trial, where he was antagonistic towards the court, showed no remorse for the dead store employees, and repeatedly gave his occupation as revolutionary. Sir, what'd you do for a living? Revolutionary! He spoke for over an hour in his closing argument and ended by shouting, "Vive le libre Québec!" Long live a free Quebec. He and Edmund Gwinnett became the last two people in Canada to be sentenced to death. In their case, by hanging. This was eventually, yeah, this was eventually commuted to life sentences. He ended up serving 14 years and was released and parole in 1978. He, I believe, was the longest serving member of any FLQ person who was arrested. That's the longest sentence any FLQ member served in prison for their actions.
Mm-hmm.
Did the entire wave up to and including the October crisis of 1970, which is a big deal. And I might do a story on the October crisis where they just flat out kidnapped members of the government. It is crazy stuff. Francois Schirm died in Laval, Quebec, August 3rd, 2014. Régis Fortin was the police officer who claimed to have killed IFC employee Alfred Pinish. In a CBC interview, his son, Daniel Fortin, says his father never recovered from that day. His career as a police officer came to an end in 1968, a decade after it started, and after a 4-year spiral of reprimands and demotions. He became an alcoholic and later a felon himself. Both Leslie McWilliams and Alfred Pinish left behind families to mourn them. So many lives ruined, all in the name of a bad plan poorly executed. And that is a brief look at Francois Schirm, leader of the third wave of the FLQ, one of the more fascinating elements of Canadian history and something I've wanted to tackle for a while here. Mm-hmm. I've got some sources here. Chris Oliveros released a book this year, 2023, from Drawn and Quarterly Press. You might remember them from the Joe Matt story I did. They're a Montreal-based graphic novel company. Wonderful graphic novel called Are You Willing to Die for the Cause, which is about revolution in 1960s Quebec. CBC Podcasts put out an excellent 7-part series on the FLQ in the fall of 2020. And I re-listened to and took some information from the December 20th, 2020 episode called The Stranger. And that's basically about Francois Schirm's life. The title of that podcast is Recall, How to Start a Revolution. So if you've liked this, you might want to check out that entire podcast. It gets in depth into everything for that. Francis Pjord, October 5th, 2020, an article on CBC Canada called Force Majeure, which is about the aftermath for Régis Fortin and his family after accidentally shooting Alfred Pinish. And the source that I wasn't sure I wanted to give, but I'll go ahead and give it because it kind of brings it all full circle. When I visited Canada for the first time in 1985 or 6, I was riding in the taxi to the airport, to the hotel with my parents. And I was quizzing the cab driver on all kinds of Canadian stuff. And he was like, oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah. How'd you know that? Da, 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 da. And I could hear my mom go, how does he know that? Because it's my father. And it was, of course, because I learned it through comic books, specifically John Byrne's Alpha Flight from Marvel Comics, which was about a Canadian superhero team, which contained one of its members, a fellow named North Star, who was Montreal by birth, and in his teenage years was a member of the FLQ. So the first time I ever heard of the term FLQ was in a comic book, and that got me started on it.
Got it.
And then a few years later, if you remember watching Die Hard, there's a scene where the great Alan Rickman, as Hans Gruber, is demanding, he's stalling and he's demanding
the release of.
He's demanding the release of all these captive brothers and sisters who are throwing off the chains of oppression. He talks about the FLQ and he demands the release of some members of the FLQ. So just a few years after that, I remember hearing that in Die Hard. So those are kind of early influences of me being interested in this FLQ movement, what it means for Canada. So there you go. A brief little peep into one of the folks involved in the Front de Libération du Québec of the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah, very cool. So went from a death penalty to actually being paroled. Like,
yep.
How does that ever happen anywhere?
It's Canada. But I believe in the 1960s.
Well, he didn't mean it.
I believe in the 1960s because Canada was still, when did Canada become an independent from
From
Great
the
Britain?
UK. Oh,
Because
geez. I don't know.
the UK outlawed hanging in the 60s as well. They stopped the death penalty as well. And hanging was on the books in the UK, I know, in the 60s.
Was it?
I just don't know when. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the 60s. I mean, well, I mean, and then the guillotine was used as late as the 70s.
Really?
Yeah, there actually is video footage, film footage of the last 2 or 3 guillotine executions because they were filmed.
Holy shit! I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. I mean, I've never seen them, but I guarantee you, Google that, you'll find them.
And they outlawed it because what the guillotine's no longer used though, right? And I
It
mean,
was outlawed in late 60s or early 70s. I mean, I would have thought that the guillotine would have been outlawed in the 18th century, but no, like
because
1975.
the people that use it on will never get ahead in life.
Right. But
Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, seek out that podcast, seek out Chris Oliveros' book. Well worth your time if you're interested at all in Canadian history or 1960s revolutionary politics, because it's all tied up with not only did they look to Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, they also look towards the Black Panthers for inspiration as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of interesting. And it's all tied up in 1968, the revolutions in France that were going on with students and the working class. And it's
Right. Yeah.
it's a very fascinating history of a little corner of 20th century world history there with the FLQ.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Super cool. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. I'm Movie Miss, one of the co-hosts of the great podcast about bad movies called Let's Talk Turkeys, where you'll find our format is a bit different than the other talking head programs you're used to. I'm a Gen Xer. My co-host is a millennial, so we're usually on the same page, but we do occasionally agree to disagree, and we always have a good laugh. Join us as we cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of cinema. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find quality podcasts.
And do we have, how you say, a curse word of the week?
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
We do, and the curse word, why this is the curse word this week will be revealed shortly because it's related to what I'm going to talk about. But the curse word is in Spanish. You actually know more Spanish than I realized you knew. The curse word, tanto del culo. Any idea?
Tanto, is that head? No, it's tanto. Fool?
Yeah. So technically, the Lone Ranger was calling Tonto an idiot. Tanto del culo, idiot of the ass. So just a little bit of casual racism, but it seemed like an appropriate curse word for the Dream Idiots podcast. Tanto del culo. There are tons of great Spanish curse words out there that are just fabulous. They just trip off the tongue so nicely.
It reminds me of the punchline. Who's weak, Kimosabi? That punchline.
Yes, exactly. So the reason that was the curse word is because I got when I was doing the 2-parter on Jean-Charles Houzeau, I got into a bit of a rabbit hole, and I've done this before on other episodes when we talked about language and idioms and all kinds of different things. But I started looking up and laughing at sort of the origins of Spanglish and sort of its history and how it has evolved over time. So you and I, of course, any listener of this podcast, has figured this out or heard this before. We're raised in Texas, and it dawned on me that I don't think I crossed the Mississippi River went anywhere east until I was 10, maybe 10, 12 years old, probably. And I spent my entire life in Texas, New Mexico, and then occasionally would cross Arizona when we would do the infernal drive all the way to California. And so I didn't really understand that or appreciate that Latinx culture wasn't just a universal thing, because my entire existence was in an area that was very Latinx centric. And then we went to Washington D.C. When we went up there, we realized, wait a minute, where'd all the brown people go? So when I talk about Spanglish, I mean, in today's vernacular, it's very often used in a very demeaning, racist context. Generally, at least that's my sense of it. I'm not endeavoring to do that at all. I'm a huge advocate for anything that is Hispanic, Mexicano, Latino, whatever you want to call it. I'm an advocate. I think most things are probably improved by having a little dose of Latinx infused whatever art, culture, history, cuisine. Everything is stepped up. So that the Spanglish, basically sort of started because the Treaty of Hidalgo, that suddenly 100,000 people that were Mexicans were suddenly Americans when that huge swath of Texas, Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, California all became part of the U.S. And so part of this came up when I was researching Huzo. And then also recently I was in a coffee shop and I heard someone refer to the Wi-Fi as Wi-Fi, which is a good little Spanglish term. I was going to go down some of the current terms that are now apparently in at least fairly common parlance these days among families that are bilingual, and they shift back and forth between Spanish and English. And some of these will be obvious. I mean, you can try to guess, as I go through them if you want.
Sure.
La pare, P-A-R-I, pare, is often used now in lieu of a fiesta party.
Oh, all right.
A slightly shorter, simpler version of a fiesta. This one I'm going to bastardize the pronunciation of. Parquing. Parquing. The other parking is the Spanglish for a parking lot. The traditional word for that is estacionamiento, is a parking lot. Is the original Spanish word for a parking lot. So yeah, parking. Ese place, P-L-A-C-A, place. The correct original Spanish expression is ese lugar, which doesn't make anywhere near as much sense. The Spanglish word conflis, C-O-N-F-L-E-I-S, actually comes from the English word cornflakes, conflis, but it is actually now, it's the common word that basically applies to any cereal. Okay. Instead of the Spanish word cereal, which is just cereal. So my favorite conflis is Lucky Charms, right? El ticket, T-I-Q-U-E-T, pretty straightforward on this one. A movie ticket,
as opposed to boleto, or
as opposed to actually for that one I actually didn't have the current the original Spanish one for that one, but now el ticket is quite common. El mouse, M-A-U-S, your computer mouse was originally el raton, R-A-T-O-N, which I guess is the word for the animal as well, but now it's el mouse, M-A-U-S. Just like el locker or locker, L-O-C-K-E-R. It's just a locker. This might be my favorite one of all of them that I found while doing the research on this. See if you can figure this one out. Vicks Vaporru.
That smell takes me back to when I was a small kid. Yeah.
Yes. So apparently Vicks Vapor Rub is been lifted almost verbatim and dropped into Spanish. Supermercado very often is replaced these days with La Marqueta, just market.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
El Rufo del Bildin, the roof of the building. Rufo and Bildin, B-I-L-D-I-N. El Rufo del Bildin. Makes, way easier to use. Tapier un email.
Your email address?
is type is sending an email.
Okay.
Yeah, some of these make me laugh. I think this would be pronounced Young You Are, JANGUEAR, but this is so JANG replaces HANG. It's just the bastardized version of hanging out. This is
Right.
it's less Mexican and more Puerto Rican, more apparently Caribbean.
Okay.
Chiarla is to chill. As straightforward, as you can get. Some more technology. Taguar is tagging someone in a photo or a
Okay.
a social media post.
Sure.
Googliar, also
To Google.
to
Okay.
Google. Yeah, very straightforward. Chequear is so CHEQUEAR is to check on something, versus revisar. Machar, MACHAR. So if you and I were wearing the exact same Dream Idiots t-shirt, we would be machando, matching.
Machando las idiotas.
Yes, exactly.
Idiotas.
Watchar, to watch.
Okay.
Tweetiar, to tweet.
But now it's not TweetR anymore. It's X.
No, now it's wait.
X.
Yes. So what do you do on X now? No, that's no longer Twitter. What is the verb now? And even in English, I don't really know. I don't.
Exeare? I don't know.
I stay off the Twitter. Estar ready?
Are you ready?
To be ready. Yeah. In Spanish, originally you would have said estar listo. Now it's to be ready is estar ready. Bien fresh. FRES. I mean, it's just anything that is good, positive, pleasant, enjoyable. It's bien fresh. Again, I can't really speak to how prevalent these are, but I'm based on my research, these are claimed to be fairly common. Muy creepy, CRIPI. So anything that is creepy, weird, awkward, etc.
Two white guys talking about this on the podcast is muy creepy.
Estar a fool is just feeling full, or it can also be spread too thin, too busy, those types of things. Lo más top, TOP. It's just something that is over the top, awesome, and good. Que show is the Spanglish word que show just describes someone who is making a scene, basically. Speculo is some of these are so hard for me to say. Que es speculo, it would be the original. Me broder, BRO. Some of these sound almost German. BRODER just replaces hermano. Brother. Me best. It literally says me best friend. Yeah, right. This is also a good one. Te carisi. TEI. Looks almost Japanese. TEIKIRISI. Te carisi. Take it easy.
Oh, I was gonna say I was gonna guess take care, but take it easy.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's like phonetically lifted straight from the.
This is almost like George Carlin's bit about how he used to listen to Yankees games in Spanish on the radio when he was a kid. Because if you could follow the count, dos, you knew exactly what was going on in the game.
Right. Yeah. Bien nisi or bien nice is just anything that's nice, pleasant, good, lifted straight. And then like creepy, muy freaky, FRIKI, is something that's freaky. And there you have it. Just some things lifted straight from Spanglish, which I kind of love. Several of these. I also have a whole host of other Spanish idioms that I came across that are muy hilarious. That I'll maybe it's worth sticking those in a little bonus by themselves, because won't use them here, but we'll may post those later just by themselves. Anyway, Spanglish. If you're a person who was born and raised in Texas and a white dude like me who regrets not learning Spanish, I don't know. I have an appreciation for these and really wish I was way more fluent.
I find it fascinating when we look at stuff like this because English is comprised of this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But we grew up with words like this, and the way that this would it was not uncommon to hear people say "callete," and just comment, which we all know what that means, or "siéntate," from teachers, or just sit down and shut up, just
right.
to the point. But yet we take for granted all of the, particularly the French expressions that we've absorbed into English culture, right? Speaking of the Québécois, but think of all the French words that we've, omelette, for example, that's a French word that we absorbed pretty easily. Which I guess gets back to your food argument of where do we start mixing cultures? It's usually through food and song and art, right? It's pretty fascinating stuff. And when we grow up with this kind of crossover language stuff, we really do take it for granted. And I remember the first time I heard someone mispronounce the word tamale somewhere, and I was just like,
right. May I harm you right now?
Well, they looked at me like, you should know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, do you mean tamales?
Right.
I don't think that's how it's said. Oh, I beg to differ. As someone who's
right.
had to stand outside Reuben's at Christmas Eve waiting to get.
It's not tortilla soup. Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, some of this just an appreciation. At some point in the past year or two, I remember watching something on C-SPAN or somewhere where there was some right winger railing on the fact that Native American culture, history, languages, etc., is not a part of American history, really, in any meaningful way. It's like, really. I think I don't know if off the top of my head, but a number of states are named after after Navajo Cherokee words, and it's when you look at all the strife going on in the world, these same errors or same mistakes that are being made over and over and over again. Palestinians versus Israelis, pick any conflict you want. Let's all take some time here to recognize and appreciate the common ground that we all share as human beings, and maybe not focus so much on all these differences.
Is it really that hard to learn how to say hello in someone else's language? Is it really that hard? Or thank you, or please, or any of these things?
Right.
It's 2 or 3 phrases that can just make all the difference in someone's day, including your own.
Right. Yeah. I'm very, obviously, as I just said, I do not speak Spanish, but I do with great regularity. I don't know why, but I often say hola. And use it in email. I don't know. I picked it up, and not often. Every once in a while, someone will like, why are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like,
I'd say that's the number one. I think it's the number one way you say hello to people is hola.
Yeah,
you personally,
and on 2-3 occasions, someone has pushed back and had a problem with me. It's always a white man has a problem with me not speaking American because I'm an American, right? Like, oh, God. Okay, yeah, whatever.
Well, I'll often like if I'm in the a large store with the family, I will text "Donde." Like if I've lost them, I'll just say, "Where are you?" Anyway,
right.
Well, there we go, Brian. Once again, we've kind of dovetailed on our stories. Language being at the center of both of our stories. In my case, French and French identity, and Francophones versus Anglophones, and in your case, the mixture of Anglophones and Spanglophones. There, very cool.
Absolutely.
Well,
Thanks for listening, folks. We appreciate you hanging out with us yet again. Please like and share and subscribe our stuff. You can check us out, Dream Idiots Podcast at Gmail. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots and dreamidiots.com. And we appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you grew up in a particular area that's not necessarily Spanish, but if you grew up in a German neighborhood or a Czech neighborhood or a French neighborhood, and there were certain words that crossed over and got mixed in, and you had, for example, one of the guys that in one of the podcasts I was listening to for my story, he talked about people singing in Franglish.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's certain phrases that you learned growing up in, in Texas, it's such a grab bag. Czechs, Poles,
Right.
Germans,
right?
Let us know about it. I had a neighbor I grew up with who grew up in just about the Germanist part of Pennsylvania that she could, and she had a litany of little German sayings she would sprinkle into her conversation here and there. Cool stuff. All right. Yes. Thank you guys for listening, and bien nice para otros. See y'all later.
Bye.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong.
Mm-hmm.
Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.